Hi there, welcome to a recording around configuring storage with UCS Director. I've got a pre-canned demo here where I'll be booting an ESXi image from the SAN, but I'll be configuring all the storage and the zoning with UCS Director in a workflow that I've created within Cisco. So I'm going to run you through the lab setup that we've got. This is clearly our UCS Director, so I'll log in as an admin user and show you what we have inside the environment itself. If we have a look at the Converge view, you can see that we've got two pods here. We've got one pod here which contains most of our equipment, and we have another pod here which includes our EMC VMAX storage, which we'll be using as part of the demo. Inside our lab here we have access to vCenter. This will be necessary particularly because the last part of the workflow itself will automatically register the new host that's booted with VMware vCenter. We have two UCS instances. We'll be using one of those today, UCSM-2. From a network perspective, we'll only be using one of these environments. We'll be using this 9148 here, which forms our Fabric A. As part of the demo, we're just going to configure Fabric A. And as part of this demo, we also have Nimble and NetApp storage, but we'll only be using the NetApp storage in conjunction with the EMC VMAX today as well. From the rest of the environment, I'll start dragging these across so you can see them. We have our NetApp view so that we can see once all of the volumes and things have been created that we are busy creating. I have an RDP session here as well into our lab so that we can see our UCS manager and we can see vCenter as well. And I have CLI access into our 9148 and also into our NetApp FAS if we wish to run any commands on that as well. So what I'll do now is I'll show you the workflow. I'm not going to do a walkthrough of UCS Director, I'll do that on another session, but I'm going to take you through the workflow that's been created so you can understand what it's trying to achieve. So this is the workflow designer view. What you'll see here is all of the individual tasks and steps that have been taken through. These are all pre-built tasks that we've used for this session today. We haven't done any custom tasks, although that is also a possibility. So to take you through what will happen, first of all we'll kick off the workflow and we'll kick it off from a self-service portal view, and I'll show you that shortly. That will send an email to myself and my colleague asking for approval. This is configured so that only one of those people have to grant approval for the workflow to continue. So the workflow will pause at this point until we've received approval notification. It will then go to UCS Manager and it will create a service profile from a pre-built template. So let me show you that template now. This is the template that we use, MH-UCSD test UCSM2. Just so you can understand what the configuration will look like, the service profiles that are created from this template will contain 4 HBAs. 2 of those HBAs will go off to the EMC VMAX, Fabric A and Fabric B. The other 2 will go off to the NetApp Fabric A, Fabric B. For the purpose of the demo, we'll actually only be using HBA2 today because we're only using one fabric and we're only going to be booting from the NetApp itself. However, these 2 will be active, or HBA0 will be active, and as from the install screen you'll see that we will eventually have access to the EMC symmetrics as well as through to the NetApp FAS itself. From a networking perspective, we have 4 Ethernet connections. We're not really going to be using those today other than ETH0, which will be our management interface for the ESXi host, and we'll be giving that its own IP address and we'll be configuring that manually, but I'll discuss that shortly. From a boot policy perspective, what we have here is we will be booting primarily, well, initially from the SAN. That's what the order will be anyway, and this here is the target WWN or WPN of the NetApp FAS. From the first go round, as we iterate through this, given that the LUN will only have just been created on the NetApp itself, clearly that LUN will be empty. So its first boot point will actually be a SIMC mounted image of ESXi 5.1, which is stored on an NFS share in our environment. It's actually on the same NetApp filer itself. That will boot over NFS for that using a vMedia policy which we've created here. And as you can see, that's the image name that it will boot. Here's the volume name it will boot from. So the first go round, it will skip this SAN here because clearly the LUN will be empty. It will go to the SIMC mounted media. It will boot from ESXi. We'll speed up the video at that point. We'll go through the install. That install is manual. And then next time round, it will boot directly from here, and we'll be able to run some commands on the adapters themselves to make sure that we can see those LUNs, and you'll be able to see that as well. The only other policies to kind of be aware of, nothing here to kind of worry about. We've just got, from a BIOS policy perspective, we've made sure we disable quiet boot so that we can see all of the booting information as the server boots. And from a firmware policy perspective, we have mixed firmware running on this environment, so we just have a host firmware package which ensures the blade is running at 223 and above, which is what we need for the vMedia boot instance. So once it's created that service profile from the template, it will go off to the profile and it will grab the WWPNs from HBA0 through to HBA3, and it will store those in variables so that we'll be able to start configuring the zoning. At this point, we'll then take those and we'll go off to the fabric. They will go off to the fabric A, the MDS9148, which I showed in a previous image. It will take HBA0 and HBA1, and at this point it will create a new zone based on the zone name you give it, which will be focused for the EMC environment. It will then go to the VMAX. It will create a meta device from 2 available thin devices, which you'll pick as part of that process when we initially kick the workflow off. It will then create a storage group. For the purpose of this, what we do is, for the storage group and the initiator group and the port group, we just take the zone name that you entered in the previous task, in order just for consistency, so that we can see all the way through the environment exactly what part we've used. However, clearly that might be different. You may expose that to your user to be able to configure their own names, but for this, purely for the purpose of the demo, we're just going to keep it simple. So we'll create the meta device, a storage group, initiator group, and the port group. We'll add the initiators to that VMAX initiator group, and we'll then add the devices to the VMAX storage group itself, and we'll finally finish off by creating a VMAX masking view as well from that storage group, initiator group, and port group. And at that point, once those configuration tasks have been done on the fabric and on the VMAX, it will send an email to myself to say that we've configured that, that's all done, that part of the workflow, and we're going to move on. You don't have to send emails here, purely just for the purpose of the demo. I'm showing what's possible here, just to kind of keep you in the loop if you're not watching this as a workflow itself. We'll then go back to the 9148 and we'll start to configure for the NetApp. This could obviously been done at the previous step. We could have done it all together, but again, I'm just trying to split this up so that we can configure each element individually. So we'll go that and we'll take that from the NetApp configuration. We'll create a NetApp flexible volume. We'll create an initiator group, add those initiators to that group, and we're going to create a 30 gig LUN. Now, as part of this is pre-configured to be 30 gig. I've done that as part of this task. We can have a look and drill into that task. I've configured it to be that, but you could again expose this to the user. All of these variables here, if we go back, if we click the tick to map to user input, then that will be presented to the user at the beginning of the workflow. Anything that isn't is predefined as part of that task here. So that would be here, and this is going to be predefined. I've defined this to be a VMware OS type and a LUN size of 30 gig at this point. Once that's done and we've mapped that LUN to the new initiator group on the NetApp, we'll send an email again just to say that the NetApp configuration is completed, and then we move on to UCS in this instance. We grab the service profile that was created at the beginning. We have got a predefined test blade, which I've already shown you on a previous image. and we're going to associate that profile to that blade. We're then going to power that blade on, and we're going to send you an email just to confirm that that server is now booting. That email also contains the next steps, which is part of this demo when I was showing this for a customer. Their ESXi install is still manual, and we just need at this point to just let that customer know that they now need to start the manual install. We also wait for approval here, and this is quite an important step, and this could be achieved in a number of different ways. Because we're waiting for approval here, the workflow will stop, so this gives us time to do the manual install for ESXi. Once that has then installed, we can go back in from an approval perspective, approve the workflow, and the workflow will start off again. We wait a period of 30 seconds just to let things settle down, and then we'll take the IP address which was entered at the beginning of the workflow for the new ESXi host. And we'll take that and we'll register that with vCenter itself, and then we'll pop you just that one last email just to say that the workflow has now completed. So I can run this workflow from here. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the different window that we have. So I'm going to log in as a different user. This will be a self-service end user portal view that your customers potentially will have. If I log out here, so as you can see, a slightly different view to what we have from an administrator perspective, but what we can do is I've published this workflow as a catalog item. So this will be deploy ESXi boot from SAN. We double click this, and the workflow request will now start. So these are the elements that I've exposed to the user that they need to configure themselves. So they need to tell us what the service profile prefix will be for UCS, how many profiles they want to create, the EMC zone name, the meta devices for the VMAX, the NetApp zone name if that needs to be different. This is where we select our fabric switch. This is the NetApp LUN name we'll give it, and this is the address that we're going to give our new ESXi host. So that's stored, and then that can be used as part of the task to automate the registration of the ESXi host into vCenter itself. Again, all of these are not necessary. You don't have to present these to your customers as part of the workflow. You could predefine what the prefix is going to be. You can predefine that we want to create one. I'm just exposing this as part of the demo. So I'll reuse that. So that's what my service profile prefix is going to be. So we'll have a look to see in UCS Manager once that's created. We're going to create one service profile. We'll keep this nice and simple, and we'll just append the vendor's name at the end so that we've got the zone name created. We're going to grab a couple of devices to build as a meta device. So as you can see, this is polled an inventory of the thin devices that we currently have available from the VMAX itself. So I'm just going to randomly pick, let's pick 7B. We then need to select a member for that if we're going to create a meta device. So let's pick 7C just for consistency. The NetApp zone name itself, we'll do the same. We'll just put NA at the end for NetApp. This is going to pick our network devices that we have access to. We're going to be using this one here, .40. Let's call that _LUN. And the address that I will be giving this will be 1087.30.75 as part of that workflow. Once I'm happy then with all of the workflow inputs, I hit next and submit. And at this point we can see now that our service request has been submitted. So what we can do here is we know that it's going to ask user mhazel for approval. So what we can do here, I will log in as mhazel. I can also now see that I've received an approval email. And this is what our approval emails will look like. The nice thing about these approval emails is they will also show you the entire workflow and at what point we're now waiting for approval. So we can see here that we're waiting for approval from one of these two users. And then the workflow will continue. So if I now go to my approvals, I'm logged in as user M Hazel, as you can see. I can see that I currently have one in pending status, and I can view the details of this particular workflow so I can understand what our user is trying to achieve. I can see the workflow here. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to approve it. And as we can see, that's now approved. So what I'll do is I'll log back in as the admin user at this point, and we'll go back and have a look at the workflow and watch it go through the various steps and understand at what point we are now within that workflow itself. So we have a look at the service requests. We can see that this one is currently in progress. Let's view the details of that. Okay, so a few steps have already happened so far. So the change has been approved. The service profile now should have been created. So let me see if I can find that. We can see mhazel ny demo _1. So this was the prefix that we gave, and we can see it's appended a 1. So the service profile has indeed. We can also see that some of the zoning has already happened, and we're already rattling through the configuration on the Vmax. So let's have a look at the zoning, just so we can see that that's been created, the first zone. Okay, so as we can see here, what it's done is it's grabbed the HBA from the service profile, and it's added that to the 2 director ports on the Vmax. Now these were pre-configured as part of the workflow. Again, they could be exposed to your customer as part of that workflow in order for you to pick which ports you wish to zone them to. But for the sake of this and for simplicity and to ensure that we don't have any fat finger incidents when configuring these, I've had that pre-configured. So we can just double check that we are happy with where it's grabbed that WWPN from. So I can see here, if I move this over slightly, (0025B5), which is the Cisco unique identifier for UCS, A0, so that's Fabric A1003. I can see A01003. So it has indeed taken the WWPN from HBA0. Okay, so let's now see where we are. Okay, we are well and truly rattling through this now. We are on the NetApp at this point. We should have received an email to say our EMC configuration is complete. So let me check our email. We have indeed. And we should have also had an email, which we have, to say that the NetApp portion is now complete as well. So what we can do is, given that we have done a considerable amount of configuration while we were walking through that previous step, is we can also now just verify from, say, the filer itself that we've had that configuration. So let's have a look at the NetApp. We can see here nydemo_na has been created as a volume perspective. We can see that it's a total of 60 gig volume, but actually the LUN etc. is 30 gig, which will match up with our configuration from our task that we created. nydemo LUN 30 gig. There we go. Let's just check the initiator groups. We can also see that we've grabbed 10.02 from the A and the B fabric, which are HBA2 and HBA3, and we've created an initiator group from those. So I'm happy with that NetApp configuration. We could go through the VMAX, but let's, while we're waiting here, just check that everything is happening as expected on UCS. So we should now see that the blade has been picked and we are currently powering on and booting that blade. Okay, so we can see that the blade is now in powered on state, and we can also see that mydemo_1 has indeed been assigned to that blade itself. What we'll show you here as well, we can also now see that we should have also received an email to say that the server is booting, which we have. This is the steps which I was showing as part of a demo previously, to say that now that server is booting, we now need to do the manual install, so we'll have a look at that shortly. We can also see at this point that we've received a second approval email, which shows the fully updated piece. We can see that it was me that approved that change, and we can see the step we're now at the moment. And it's an important step for the process of this demonstration, because the install itself will be manual at this point. So we don't want to approve this just yet. We want to give ourselves time to do the install. What we'll show you here as well is a particularly useful feature, particularly if something has failed as part of your workflow, is our logging. We can see that we actually have very detailed logging. As we step through these tasks, we can see exactly where we are and exactly what variables are passed as part of that. So we can see here, for instance, the elements that were used and configured on the NetApp as part of the task that we had previously. So it's a very useful logging tool. If anything fails, it comes up in red and it highlights the error in an orange message, so that we can see exactly at what point we failed and exactly what inputs and outputs we had at the point that it did fail. So the onboard logging here is particularly useful as part of this tool. So what we'll do then is we'll go to our UCS system and let's boot the KVM console so that we can have a look at how we're getting on with the ESX boot. So at this point, it's quite important for us to ensure that we have booted the ESXi image from the NFS share. Okay, so what we can see from here is that we are indeed booting ESX. There's no onboard drives on this blade, so this is booting directly from that NFS share. What we will also do as part of this now is just to show you that the HBAs are able to see the LUNs that should be presented. And this is one of the elements that we'll be able to check now if our configuration has worked, particularly from a zoning perspective. So if we just show the zones now, we should now see that the second zone is in there. We can see we have the EMC zone and the NetApp zone. After this configuration, we didn't actually activate the zone set. We waited until after this one is complete before the zone set is activated. So if we show zone set active, we should see here, this is the one we're concerned about as part of this demo. We can see that everything is as expected. So let's have a look at What we can do here, this is the UCS CLI, so we can connect directly to the adapter on the blade itself. So this is connecting to adapter in chassis 2 server 8 adapter 1. We connect again. We can now see that this has changed context. We are indeed on the adapter. We can attach to the fabric login services, and we can list the VNICs we have. The one we're concerned about will be VNIC 19 in this instance, because this is referenced in HBA2. So there are a number of different commands we can run at this point. What we will do here first is let's run a login 19. This is the port name. We can see the ID that we're passed back. Let's have a look at let's do LUN map first. We can see here that we have logged in to the NetApp port, and we can see that the port login has worked. LUN 0 ID has been passed back. If this hadn't been logged in correctly, we would have seen an N here. This element here, what we log into, is determined as part of the UCS boot policy. So we have a SAN boot target which we configured as part of that, which I showed you right at the beginning. We can do a LUN list here as well. Now we can see here that it's all been successful, and we know this through a number of reasons. For a start, we can see that we've got an FCID passed back. We can also see that we've queried these name servers here, which are the NetApp ports, and we've received back the LUN ID, and we've received back the vendor. If we hadn't have seen that, then we would have known straight away that there is an issue at this point. We here have only presented one LUN. If we had presented more, we would have seen a list here of the various LUNs we'd presented. So based on what I can see here, I'm happy that we've logged in. We can see that this is a NetApp LUN, and we've got the serial number here as well. We've got the device types and things here. I'm happy now that we have logged in and we can see this. So this to me indicates that our zone-in configuration has all worked as expected. We'll wait now for this to boot, and we will start the manual install step. Okay, now we can also see here that our zoning has worked correctly, because we can see that 2 LUNs have been presented to the host. So we have an EMC LUN presented here, 18.75 gig. As you remember, we had 2 9 gig thin devices grouped together as a meta device and presented here. And we've got the NetApp LUN, which is 30 gig, which is the one that we will be using to install from. Okay, so at this point now our ESX host is booted. It's also now configured with an IP address. I've also tested that it can see the vCenter piece. So now we are due to go and restart the workflow again by accepting the approval piece. So as I mentioned, we'd had the email for approval. We can see that one of us needs to approve it. Let's log in as user mhazel, and we should see shortly a request in my approval list. I can see it's pending. Again, I can just view the details of it, make sure I'm happy, can see where we are. Next thing it will do, once I've approved, it will wait for 30 seconds, like I say, just to let things settle. This is a task which actually within this workflow doesn't actually achieve a great amount because we know at the moment that the system is ready and it's ready to go. However, as part of the demo, this is just something to show that we can include tasks such as conditional statements. We could include loops at these points in order to iterate over various lists and things like that. We can wait for a predefined amount of time. I've waited here just for 30 seconds. And next thing it will do is then go off and register the host with vCenter. It takes a few minutes, but we should see that pop up, and then the workflow should indeed complete. So I'm going to approve this. Let's log out. Let's log back in as an admin user. What we should see at some point is a new host pop up here. But what we'll do while we're waiting for that, let's have a quick look at the service request and just make sure that it's progressing as it should. We can see it's in progress. We can see that we've waited for the 30 seconds and it's begun the process of registering the host with vCenter. So we should see it pop up on the left hand side. What we'll do while we're here is we can just we didn't do it earlier, so we can just double check that the EMC configuration is as expected. We created a meta device, so let's have a look at the meta device. We can see we can see here that the host is being added. It's currently in disconnected state. We can see here this is our meta device. 7B is the meta head. We included 7B and 7C. We can see here, if I just move this back over, the initiator group has been created. We can see there is a mask interview associated to it. There's 2 initiators within the group. We have a port group created, and we can see the 2 ports. These are the ones that were predetermined. Let's just finish off by looking at the masking view. We can see here that the masking view is created from this port group, this initiator group, and this storage group. Now, as you can see, purely for the point of the demo, I've kept the naming consistent here, exactly the same across, but it's entirely up to you how you do that. As we can see now from vCenter, we can see our new host has been added. We can just hit the summary. We can see everything is in there. If we have one last look at the service request itself, we can see that the request has completed successfully. That's the end of the demonstration. I hope that was useful.